Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Science of Monster Hunter. Today we're covering Gore Magala, one of the coolest and definitely the edgiest monster in the entire series. So to start, just like with every monster that I talk about, I've given Gormagala a binomial name. What that is it's a combination of the genus and species. As scientists, we make sure that every binomial name we give to an organism is different so that we can have a non-confusing name that hopefully remains the same forever to deal with these animals in a scientific way. So for the binomial name of Gormagala, I've called it Anthracopelta magala. Uh, Anthraco meaning coal black, it's Greek. Pelta, also Greek, meaning shield or covering, in reference to the kind of cloak that it has, and also the big broad scales on its back. And then Magala, this is Aramaic. It means incarnation or incantation, or like abstraction of something. And that just references the common name Magala, which is what uh, the Monster Hunter developers got that name from. It means gore incarnate in kind of Aramaic English, I guess. Gore has this really, really distinct rhamphotheca on its face. A rhamphotheca basically is the keratin covering of an animal's snout and sometimes teeth. Keratin is the material that your fingernails are made out of. It's the material that a bird's beak is made out of. It's the material that most animals' scales are made out of. And so here in Gore Magala, we can see that it has these kind of broad keratin sheets covering its face because it has a beak surrounding its teeth. And this rhamphotheca that it has is super, super serrated. It has these grooves that are running up and down it. And in birds that have a serrated rhamphotheca, most often we're seeing their beaks used to grip prey that are slippery, like fish. So this is a red-breasted or common merganser here. I don't know off the top of my head which, but all the mergansers have this kind of saw-like bill that helps grip very slippery fish that other birds with smoother bills would have a much harder time grabbing. The thing with Gormagala, though, that kind of drives me away from that is the fact that it has teeth inside of its rhamphotheca. It has these little palatine teeth here, and it also has teeth in its lower jaw. So that got me thinking, okay, there has to be another reason other than the teeth, or other than grabbing prey, that its rhamphotheca is serrated like that. So to try and figure out why Gormagala has that serrated rhamphotheca, my mind went, as it often does, from the mouth to the feet. And I looked at the sort of nails of some birds, and you can see that a lot of these birds have very deeply serrated. This is an owl. They have very deeply serrated toenails. They have one on each foot usually, and these are called preening claws, or something along those lines. And what that allows this animal to do is organize its feathers more properly. So as they drag these claws through the feathers, they kind of serve the purpose of a comb and keep these feathers organized, stitch the little hooklets and barbules back together, and just keep everything nice and smooth, which is really, really important for an animal that is using its feathers to fly. But it's also just really important to keep yourself comfortable. Now, some birds, like this crossbill, can use their beaks just to preen. And so what I'm thinking here is that Gormagala has a combination of those features. It has a lot of preening to do. It has a lot of combing to go through. It preens a lot, as you can see in this drawing that I've done here. Gormagala will frequently just sit and go like, and so, in my mind, it's probably using its highly serrated rhamphotheca, and especially those projections on its chin, which would serve no purpose in food processing, to kind of drag them through its coat and make sure that all of its filaments are aligned properly. In my opinion, it's probably more likely that they're feathers than hair, because in Shagaru Bagala they're scales, and we see scale to feather transitions in nature, but we don't see scale to hair or feather to hair or anything of that sort, because scales and feathers in birds are basically the same structure, just plus or minus a few genes that get activated. So what's up with these freaking things on Gormagala's face? These are like barbels, basically. That's what I'm going to call them. When it flips them up, it's kind of an example of the Flehmen response, which is something that a lot of animals do, where they'll pop up their upper lip. Like, if you've ever seen a horse go like, "Arr," what they're doing is they're moving air into something called the vomeronasal organ that humans don't have, but like basically every other animal does, or every other vertebrate, I should say. And that allows them to smell better. Um, Gore Magala relies a lot on its sense of smell. It's primarily a scent-based predator, which is really interesting. And so I am assuming because its sense of smell gets more precise, it gets better at hitting you with attacks when these barbels flip up, that it's probably doing something similar. Now, obviously, it's not the exact same. Uh, these barbells might have scent receptors on them on their own, so flipping them up just makes them more sensitive, kind of like catfish barbells. Catfish taste with their barbells because they have chemoreceptors, like you do inside your nose, just all along them. So maybe Gore Magala is just using them to pick scent straight up from the air. Maybe they're channeling those particles down into the vomeronasal organ where they can be processed. Um, Either way, very interesting trait, and the forked kind of nature of them would very much help Gore Magala tell which direction its prey is coming from. If you have more scent on the left stalk than you do on the right stalk, you know that you have to turn left to chase after your prey. Something very similar occurs with the tongues of snakes. So this is an example of how snakes use their tongues to put chemicals or scent into their vomeronasal organ. In snakes, it's called the Jacobson's organ, so it's right here. And they'll stick their tongue out and they'll tap it on the Jacobson's organ, and then they'll stick it out again. So I think that Gore Magala might be doing something similar with its feelers or barbels, where each side is kind of channeling its own scent down into the brain of the animal so that it can get a better sense of direction. Thing that I found really interesting about Gore Magala is that it has a really flat tail. In cross section, the tail is like almost that shape, which is really bizarre. It's not very common with elder dragon tails. Usually they're almost perfectly round. And so I was thinking about why that could be. Initially, I was like, oh, it could be a display structure. It makes the animal look bigger. There are two key problems with that. One, Gore Magala can't look, so a visual display structure like that would serve absolutely no purpose. And two, Gore Magala can't mate. They're all sterile until they metamorphose and transform into their adult sexually active form. So initially, my thought of it's a display structure to make it look bigger is pretty dumb. Um, because I shot that down immediately. It does have a function. A lot of the time you see flattened tails to help animals stabilize themselves in water, but it does so happen that in nature, water and air are pretty similar. And just like fish have kind of dorsal fins and tail fins, some pterosaurs actually have these vertical slats on their tails. So this is a Rhamphorhynchus. It's a pterosaur that has a tail that kind of sticks out like a rudder, and you can see it's tall and flat on the end, just like Gore Magala's tail. And so I figure that because Gore Magala is a very large flighted animal, it's probably to its benefit to have that extra stability, especially because just flying without seeing, you're going to want some extra uh, kind of rudders and control surfaces to make yourself a little bit more stable in the air. Because you're at a significant disadvantage when it comes to animals that fly with the use of their sight, especially because it doesn't seem like Gore Magala can echolocate. So it's really only going off of scent and maybe feeling the direction of the wind, which those hairs all over its wings could help with, or feathers or filaments or whatever you want to call them, because they could be very valuable sensory organs to tell Gore Magala if it's approaching like an open area where it can fly freely, or if it's maybe getting close to the ground where the air would flow around differently. So this is another really interesting note. If you look at the bones in Gore Magala's wings, it'll have one big bone here and two little bones here, and then it'll have all of its fingers and its thumb right there, and then its pinky finger is this thing, which sticks out and supports the wing membrane, which is just like the pterosaurs that we were talking about last slide. So this is a pterosaur wing here. I believe it's Pteranodon that this is. And you can see it has its thumb and its first two fingers there, and then it has its kind of pinky finger here. It's not really its pinky finger. I believe it's a ring finger. The pinky finger in pterosaurs is absent. But this is the thumb, the first digit, and the second digit. Or the thumb, the second digit, and the third digit. And then this right here is called the pteroid. It's just a weird thing that pterosaurs have to help support the propatagium that Gore Magala does not have. tangent over, Gore Magala's wings are really similar to pterosaurs, and I thought that was very interesting. With the addition of this kind of extra digit that they have here, it makes sense that they would have an extra digit because Gore Magala, unlike pterosaurs, seems to have claws on all five fingers instead of just the first three. And so, therefore, Gore Magala probably gets more use out of having all of these fingers free and would not have lost its pinky, therefore allowing the pinky to support the wing membrane, like we see. So, another really bizarre thing about Gore Magala's limbs, wings, feet, is on its forelimbs, which it does a lot of its grabbing and killing with. It doesn't have the typical situation for modern day predatory like birds. So predatory birds today have this thing. This is called the hallux. It's your thumb. Well, it's your big toe, but your big toe and your thumb are pretty analogous to one another. So this is the first digit. It's rotated all the way back. In Gore Magala, that doesn't seem to be the case because the fifth digit is the one that's opposed in the hands. So our first kind of weird situation, the first digit is like down here, it's very reduced. And the second digit is what sticks out in the front and has this giant claw on it. So we know that Gore Magala is not using its first digit to kill in the way that predatory birds do, which is kind of bizarre. Even in dinosaurs that use their hands for predation, we see that the thumb is doing most of the killing work. So, like in Megaraptorans and Spinosaurs, the thumb is the largest claw. What this condition mirrors is actually the feet of Dromaeosaurs, which is the group of dinosaurs that includes Velociraptor and Deinonychus. And you can see that they had this gigantic claw. This is on the second digit, just like in Gore Magala, but this is on the foot, not the hand. And so what that says to me is that Gore Magala is using the second digit of its hand rather than a thumb on the hand or the big toe on the foot, as we see usually for predation. And I just think that's really bizarre and really interesting as a design choice. It's the kind of thing that you only really get in Elder Dragons because you can't really directly reference any real animals for their anatomy. So you kind of have to get creative, and I think it's really a cool little detail of biology that makes these animals seem bizarre to someone who spends a lot of their time studying animals. Even the more you look into the animals like the elder dragons, the super weird ones, the more you realize just how weird they are, which I think is really really cool. Yeah, sorry to everybody who's like anti-feet. This is a really foot-heavy lecture. I'm big into feet. I think they're one of the coolest parts of the body of any animal. They tell you a lot about how things move, how they operate. What can I say? I love limbs. Gore Magala's feet are so interesting, particularly because another point of inspiration seems to be elephants. Elephants are a weird point between plantigrade and digitigrade. And what that means, for people who don't know what those words mean, plantigrade means that you're walking on your heel like a human. So you see how humans have this is my heel. My camera's reversed, sorry. So this is my heel, these are my toes, and then I'm walking like this with my heel on the ground. That's plantigrade. Digitigrade is like when you go on your tiptoes, when you're in high heels, but with no heel. So your toes are the only thing supporting your weight. A horse, for example, is digitigrade. They're walking on their fingernails, basically. Dogs are digitigrade. Um, yeah, a lot of the Monster Hunter monsters are digitigrade. Gore Magala is technically digitigrade because the bones in its hands and feet that support its weight, the only bones that do that are the bones in the fingers. But just like an elephant, they're technically like a weird middle ground. So you can see here in the elephant, the finger bones, or the toe bones, sorry, are the ones that are mainly supporting the weight. But there's also this giant fatty pad that channels the weight directly upwards into the heel bone. So even though that heel bone doesn't touch the ground, even though the heel bone of Gore Magala doesn't touch the ground, the toes have this like gigantic fatty pad on them. And that sends the weight straight upwards without putting a ton of stress on those claws and those delicate fingies, which is really, really cool. That's such a good detail. That it blew me away when I saw it. I was so impressed by it. It's amazing. Um, and this makes it so that the animal just puts less stress on its joints, on its fingers when it's walking. And it also allows it to save energy. Um, it's really cool. I think that's so awesome. It also makes it quieter when it's moving around. because there's that like cushioning. Fat is a lot quieter when it kind of squishes them. Bones and claws hitting the ground. That's why elephants don't clop like a horse does. They don't go. They like when they walk on like a hard surface, they just kind of thud. So I know we've already gone over the fact that Gore Magala primarily navigates by scent, but that's because it can't see at all, which is insane. It's a flying animal that can't see. Uh, it doesn't lack eyes per se, it just lacks functional eyes. If you look at the model of Gore Magala, there are tiny little eyes in there, and you can even kind of see them when it flips its like barbels forward, but you still can't flash pot it, so the eyes don't work. Um, they just seem to be unneeded at this life stage. Shigaru Magala is probably doing a lot more sight-related activity um, because it has fully developed eyes that it can see with. So why on earth would an animal of any kind lose its sight? How could that possibly be beneficial for the lifestyle of a predator? Well, if you're familiar with like schlocky early 2000s horror, you might be aware of The Descent, which is a movie about people who go underground and they find these like kind of troglodyte cave people who look a lot different, they act a lot different, and that's because caves exert a lot of evolutionary pressure in some really bizarre ways. But one interesting thing about them is they kind of relax that selective pressure around sight. They make it so that having eyes is not this overwhelming advantage that it is in a non-cave ecosystem. And that's because having eyes in a cave is kind of like owning a yacht in a landlocked state, or having a cup holder in your car in a place where you're not allowed to drink and drive. It's useless. It's a useless or almost useless trait, and all it does is either drain you of money if you're buying a yacht or you're buying a cup holder, and drain you of energy if you're, developing eyes. Not using those eyes is going to save a lot of energy. The brain is an organ and it requires nutrients to function. And the loss of that sort of organ is really, really beneficial. And so there are, I think, a few um, maybe alternative explanations to the loss of sight that kind of don't do it as well as caves for Gore Magala. One of them is that it just operates at night. It hunts at night. It doesn't need sight. That's not true for two reasons. One of them is that Gore Magala doesn't only hunt at night. It runs around during the day, and it seems to do that pretty often. And the other one is that you can still see at night if you have highly adapted night vision. There's still light that hits the ground, and you can use it to perceive things. A lot of animals have great night vision. Um, Another potential explanation is that their ancestors were eyeless, which is true to an extent. Um, but if Gore Magala had a use for eyes and it was constrained by an eyeless ancestor, then Shigaru Magala wouldn't have eyes either. So Gore Magala clearly has the genetic information necessary to develop eyes. It just doesn't have that selective pressure when it's young. It doesn't need them until it molts, just like a lot of underground insects, or just insects in general that don't really need complex light receptors like eyes. So, to shoot down an anticipated argument against my cave hypothesis, why is Gore Magala black if it lives in caves? Cave animals usually lose all their coloration. That is true to an extent, but it's not entirely true. So, on the right here, we have a species of olm. This is called the black olm, and this is the common olm. Not very common, definitely an olm. There are both kinds of cave salamanders. They're each other's closest relatives. In fact, they're not even separate species. One of them is a subspecies. Um, and the black olm, noticeably, has melanin in its skin. It's got dark skin, and that's pretty bizarre for a cave animal, but just goes to show it's still possible. There are also some other explanations. Um, the number one that I can think of is that Gore Magala, while it might primarily live in caves, or at least live in caves for a significant portion of its youth, maybe from hatching up until they start to get large enough to be ready to molt. That's why we don't see any baby Gore Magalas on the surface. Um, that dark coloration would help them stay protected from the sunlight. You don't want sun damage. You don't want all that transparent skin allowing UV light to hit your organs. And also, it could be that even if they're only out at night, when they're on the surface, Being dark in color would just act as camouflage. It would help them stay hidden. Maybe if they're just venturing around the openings and the mouths of caves, that camouflage would still be useful. The alternative explanation for why Gore Magala is dark in color is that there is no reason for it to be anything other than that. That is to say, there is no disadvantage to it having that dark color. Now, normally when animals are dark in color, it costs them energy to produce that pigment to push into their skin. However, Gore Magala has a very, very cheap and easy source for a dark coloration that costs it presumably zero energy, and that's the frenzy virus because it's already part of it. It's like Gore Magala's main hunting mechanism. And so Gore Magala may just be dark in color as a result of the frenzy virus growing and living inside of it. We see that the frenzy virus causes a lot of the wyverns and beasts and all that stuff to become darker in coloration, even if they're only infected for a short period of time. So imagine what living with the frenzy virus inside Gore Magala would do for its entire lifespan. It seems to exude this kind of purple black ooze or miasma, and I imagine that would probably stain the scales and skin of Gore Magala, and have it be darker in coloration just as a result of the virus living inside of it. So viruses causing coloration of the scales in this case is advantageous, and it's an example of what's called self-decoration camouflage, which is a behavior where animals will cover themselves in material that's not originally part of themselves in order to better blend into their surroundings. So, for example, this assassin bug larva is, or assassin bug nymph is covering itself in sand, and this crab is covering itself in sponge. And that allows them to just better blend into their environment without expending the energy that's required to put pigment into their exoskeleton. And so I think Gore Magala might be doing something similar with the frenzy virus, and I think that's pretty cool. So obviously, the frenzy virus isn't just a way for Gore Magala to efficiently color its skin. It's also a crucial part of this animal's hunting strategy. Gore Magala hunts exclusively via symbiosis with the frenzy virus. Um, I say virus question mark because there's no real way to tell what actual kind of microvirus or microorganism this is. But it's called a virus, so I'm calling it the virus. It goes through a series of steps that I'm going to lay out here as it hunts, starting with the first two. First, it transmits the frenzy virus by shedding particles from its skin. These are assumed to be the little filaments that make up its kind of cloak, and they kind of fly off and they get carried by wind into the mucous membranes, into the lungs of passers-by, creatures that are susceptible to the infection, which seem to be exclusively larger bodied monsters. And so once that happens, the frenzy particles enter that animal's system and they start to go to work. Step 3, the infection progresses, the animal starts to show symptoms, its skin darkens, just like what we would expect in Gore Magala. They become more aggressive. They start to transmit the virus through that aggression. They'll bite other creatures. They'll become more aggressive to hunters. And they'll also kind of push out rival predators from the area because they're stronger and more aggressive, and those rival predators don't necessarily want to contend with that, which means that Gore Magala doesn't have to compete with other predators for this prey item anymore. And it doesn't even have to exert that much effort to get that prey item into that state. So it's a very energy efficient way of driving competition out of the area. Then the final step, Gore Magala jumps on him, eats him. This has happened many times just in cutscenes. For example, the Yankut coup in the cutscene at the end of Monster Hunter Wilds gets set upon by Gore Magala and it eats it. The frenzied prey just often gets subdued by claws, just like with that big second digit that I mentioned earlier. Gore Magala doesn't really seem to use its mouth all that much for predation, more so just for food processing, which explains why its teeth are kind of small and peg-like as opposed to like slicing teeth like we see in a lot of like obligate like predators that use their mouths to kill. But yeah, it jumps on its diseased prey and it kills and eats it. Is there really anything like this in nature? Well, no. But there are kind of inspirations for this sort of thing. So this is kind of like a big mixing pot of three major concepts. The first one is the misconception about Komodo dragons and other lizards having a septic bite. Komodo dragons don't actually have bacteria in their mouth more than other predators do. Predators in general kind of just have nasty mouths and they carry a risk of infection, but Komodo dragons are venomous. They don't track their prey for days after a bite and wait for it to die of disease. They're pretty active, violent predators, and they'll just jump on something, kill it, and then eat it. Now, if stuff escapes, usually it will get killed by a Komodo dragon eventually because of the venom, but it's very rarely the same one. Nature documentaries have a way of framing this that's not entirely accurate, and I have kind of a gripe about that. So that doesn't mean that this myth could not have inspired Gore Magala because it's not true. Um, a lot of the monsters in Monster Hunter are directly inspired by myths. This one is more so inspired by an urban legend. Another thing that could have inspired this is the idea of snakes smelling their own venom. So rattlesnakes in particular, I believe, have kind of like a specific protein in their venom that is very easily detectable to them, and because they engage in a bite and release strategy, which is pretty unique to venomous snakes, constrictor snakes will bite something and then just hold on to it until it dies, of course. And I believe a lot of venomous snakes will do that as well. I think king cobras do. But rattlesnakes bite, they let whatever they get away, and then they'll track it down by sniffing out their own venom, which they can do with pretty great ease. And so Gore Magala does that with the frenzy virus and its little feelers. And then the other thing, just inspiring the general symptoms and transmission of the frenzy virus, is rabies. It's a virus that is pretty well known. It makes people really, really aggressive, and it causes rapid changes in behavior, just like the frenzy virus does. And so that seems to have pretty directly inspired just the pathology associated with Gore Magala. And so all that stuff kind of fell into a big mixing pot. And then the secret ingredient was a good creature design to, I guess, tie it all together. I don't know. Mainly pay attention to the first three. Anyway, that's today's little lecture. I hope everybody enjoyed, and please let me know if you have any questions or if you have something to tell me that I'm wrong about. I do always love getting corrected. Science is not a solo process. This is my idea, my hypothesis, and if it stands uncorrected, then it will remain my hypothesis. But if someone brings up a point that excellently and swiftly defeats it, I will change it, go back to the drawing board, and come up with something that is hopefully more accurate. So please let me know if you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong, if you have something interesting to share, or if you just liked the video, go ahead and leave a comment. And as always, a huge thank you to my paid supporters. Without this, I couldn't be doing this as often for you guys, and so I really appreciate everyone's continued support. It really blows my mind to see how this community has been going. These guys are all subscribed to me on TikTok, and so I thank them personally. They get access to my Discord server and all my art, my PSDs, scans, all that stuff. So thank you so much to Splift, DJ, Cake Chad the Vast, Ellie the Anki, Brick Floatsmore, Joe Evans, Ian, Gremlin Hours, and Devin Wilberg. You guys are awesome, and I really, really appreciate your continued support. It allows me to do what I do much more often. Thanks everybody for watching. Please let me know you enjoyed. Like if you liked, subscribe if you subscribe to my ideas. Yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed the video, and I look forward to delivering a new one soon. Thank you so much.